Thank you, Simon. So good morning, all. Um, it's good to see you all, albeit virtually. Um, I saw a few pictures of you guys earlier. Familiar faces, as someone has indicated. It is an honor and pleasure for me to speak to you this morning. Of course, it is a daunting task. When Simon asked me to speak to you about um, counterfeit goods this morning, I reluctantly agreed because um, you all know what counterfeit goods are. You know everything about this particular topic, and there's very little for me to talk about. But nevertheless, I agreed to address you, and I decided to focus on some of the trends that we observed during the pandemic. And of course, um, some of them are not new, but they were nevertheless prevalent during this period. So today we're going to talk about counterfeit and illicit goods trends during the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, and I will focus on a few areas and some of the related topics that you may find interesting, or which I think you may find interesting. So obviously we're going to look at the trends, um, particularly in South Africa and the neighboring states. And of course, we're going to look at some of these trends in some countries up in the north as well. So I have got a specific matter that I would address you on relating to the face masks in Kenya, which was widely reported on. And then I've got some video clips, hopefully they play, just to demonstrate some of the methodologies that were adopted in an attempt to smuggle the goods from one country to the next. And then we will briefly look at the importation of unregistered and prohibited medicines in South Africa and other territories. And then, of course, the famous COVID-19 vaccine seized in South Africa. I wouldn't do justice if I don't touch on the sale of counterfeit goods online, which became prevalent during the pandemic. And then I will close by just sharing with you some of the effective measures which I think helped us and our client to put up a fight against the online sale of counterfeit goods. Now, of course, during the global COVID-19 pandemic, um, governments around the world implemented the national lockdowns to contain the spread of the coronavirus. And as a result of that, borders were closed for passengers, but specified cargoes for essential products and supplies were permitted. Despite these unprecedented restrictions on movement of people and some hindrance to air and sea freight, criminals were once again step ahead of law enforcement, and counterfeit goods trade continued to thrive. We all know that traditionally consignments of counterfeit goods originate from China and are transported through or around the globe using normal air and sea freight. But syndicates devised methodologies to try and work around getting the goods into various continents and countries um, during the pandemic, and in the process continuing to make lots and lots of money. So these strategies were devised specifically to avoid detection and detention of counterfeit and illicit products um, at the harbors or border post, if you like. Now, what are these strategies that we observed? There may be many more out there, but I would like to share ones that I think they're probably at the top of the list. The most important one is the transportation of counterfeit goods through chartered aircrafts, landing at obscure airports in the early hours of the morning when customs inspection controls and clearance are frankly usually quite relaxed. Now, this method of transporting goods, of course, it's been around for many years, but of course, it was dedicated to high value commodities like gold, diamonds, and currencies. It is not often that you see counterfeit goods being transported in this particular manner. Of course, because it is hugely exorbitant. I will share much further information regarding this in the slides to follow. The second methodology, of course, was the importation documents were falsified to reflect commodity as essential goods or products. Now, this is quite interesting because some of you may know that when you import goods in general, you use what we call tariff codes to enable customs to determine what duties and taxes must be paid on that particular consignment. Now, generally, duties and taxes on essential goods are much higher than your textile products, if you like. And what we observed was that there were textile goods that were coming in very quickly, even though they were not categorized as essential goods. And that was because the importation documents were falsified to reflect them as essential commodity. But that translated into counterfeiters paying more duties and taxes to customs to actually expedite the release of these consignments. Thirdly, we also observed that these vessels that usually transport goods from China to Africa, in general, they would dock in Mauritius. And some of the consignments are offloaded in Mauritius before the vessel continued further south into the continent. Now, there has been a concerted effort through collaboration in the region, and as well as with international law enforcement, Interpol, Customs, World Customs Organization, and with the Mauritian Customs to share information when these vessels stop in Mauritius, and if they notice something suspicious, to share that information with their counterparts wherever that vessel is likely to stop and or is destined. Now, as a result of that, so customs is able to anticipate a vessel with a specific consignment, and they can actually red flag that particular consignment based on the information they received from Mauritius customs. So counterfeiters seems to have got wind of this, and now these vessels, instead of first docking in Mauritius, they skip that and go directly to their destination, be it in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Kenya, wherever it might be. And finally, clearance in South Africa and many other African countries was based on a false transshipment claim. And obviously, we are all aware that counterfeiters, when they import these goods, particularly if they are destined for landlocked countries, they then declare that particular consignment on a transshipment basis, and therefore the customs in South Africa, for example, would not be interested in actually inspecting a consignment destined for Lesotho or Swaziland. They will just simply release it on the basis that the duties and taxes are payable to the customs of the final destination. And this is a good excuse for counterfeiters to let the consignment go, and then instead of that consignment going to Lesotho or Swaziland, it falls off the truck and then it's sold in Johannesburg, and no duties and taxes are paid on it. So these four strategies were quite prevalent during the pandemic, and I will demonstrate them in some of the slides in my presentation. Now, traditionally, counterfeit goods originate and flow from Asia to Africa, as I indicated earlier on. However, during the pandemic, we observed a phenomenon which has never been experienced in the past, whereby large quantities of personal protective equipment products moving from South Africa to Europe, specifically the UK, Spain, and Italy. Of course, when the pandemic started, we went through the first wave, second wave, and now we are at the end of the third one. And these waves, they change from continent to continent and sometimes from country to country. And therefore, the demand for PPE will also fluctuate. What we observed when we went into lockdown in March last year was that there were quite a number of Facebook advert posts where people were selling significant amount of COVID-related items or products. We saw masks that are unbranded being offered for sale. We saw face masks, some of them clothing masks that were branded with sporting or luxury brands. And lastly, we saw large quantities of face masks, gloves, face shield bearing the 3M trademarks being sold online. And this prompted us to conduct investigations. And we uncovered a registered medical facility run by medical doctors in Durban, which had 2 containers full of counterfeit face masks, gloves, as well as eyewear that was sold to Spain. Now, obviously, when they had these consignments and they saw that during April, May last year, the number of infections and fatalities in Spain and Italy specifically were quite high, they saw an opportunity to sell those products to the hospitals in those two countries. They got in touch with the brokers, and they sold these products, obviously at the border, because it was declared as essential products. They let them through quite quickly, and then these consignment ended up in Spain. Unfortunately, we couldn't trace where they ended up, but we know for sure that documentation indicated those two consignment had left South Africa for Spain. And interestingly, a consignment of 100,000 masks arrived at our Tambo International Airport, imported by a South African entity, and those masks mysteriously disappeared. Now, of course, this was quite concerning to us and our client, and we started making further inquiries and investigations to determine where those goods ended up. And the fear was that they may have ended up in hospitals, meaning that they will compromise the safety of our doctors and other medical personnel. Investigations revealed, shockingly, that this particular consignment was released on a false or forged document. Now, a copy of a release notice was handed in at customs cargo section, and the cargo section released this consignment on that particular release. Now, two things. Our customs work on an EDI system whereby all release notices must be uploaded electronically onto the system. But in this particular case, it was a copy handed in by an individual. Secondly, when you look at that particular release notice, it was issued out on the very old customs letterhead, and purportedly signed by a customs officer who passed away 7 years ago. So whoever that was behind this knew exactly what they were doing. We sat down with the importer to try and understand where the goods ended up. And his version was that these goods, he received them and then he sold them to neighboring countries in small chunks. So we couldn't trace these particular goods after that. Now, what was also interesting was that when we sat with the importer to try and understand how this transaction came about, was that he saw these goods being advertised online. He reached out to a broker in Hong Kong, and he entered into a door-to-door transaction. Now, the door-to-door transaction, it seems to be a preferable contractual arrangement between the importer and the supplier these days. And what that means is that the responsibility of packing that particular consignment into a container or into an aircraft, the transportation of that particular consignment, its insurance en route, clearance at the country of destination, and transportation to the importer's warehouse or address. All of that responsibility is in the hands of the supplier. Now, the importer claimed that that's what happened, and he just waited and received the goods. As to what happened with the clearance, he can't tell. He knows nothing about it. And strangely enough, on the documentation, you can't find any local clearing agent reflected on the documents. It's a clearing agent based in Hong Kong, which is quite very odd. Now, 2 months later, it then transpired that a consignment of 1 million face masks was detained entering Spain, destined for 2 private hospitals there. Upon closer scrutiny, of the batch codes and the other numbers on the products. It then transpired that the 100,000 masks that disappeared at OR Tambo had in fact formed part of the 1 million consignment that ended up in Spain. Investigations revealed what had happened is that the South African importer had imported quite a number of consignment into South Africa, and he had a huge amount of product or stock in his warehouse in South Africa. And then he then managed to sell 1 million of those through a broker in Spain. And then the transaction was concluded, and these things were actually chartered in a chartered craft out of OR Tambo, landing in Ethiopia, and then to Europe. Now, documents indicate that that one trip from OR Tambo to Europe, the importer had paid 350,000 US dollars to transport those 1 million face masks in that one single transaction. Now, if he's willing to pay that much money, you can imagine how much money he was making out of the transaction. Now, because of the huge demand of these products, they were being sold at over 500% markup, which is a significant amount. I'm talking about huge sums of money here. So these type of sales could only be observed during this pandemic. As you all know, the ACA in Kenya also published a seizure of almost 20,000 face masks that were found at a university hospital in Nairobi. And what is concerning here is that that consignment had already passed customs. The goods were already delivered at the hospital, and the hospital personnel had already started using these masks. It was the doctor that actually smelt something offish in this mask, and he actually reported to the hospital manager. The hospital manager reached out to the ACA reached out to us to confirm authenticity. And it is then that we picked up that something was horribly wrong with these masks. And then we arranged with the ACA to have them seized. Now, what we then discovered during our investigations is that the supply of these masks had actually provided somebody who won the tender to supply these to the hospital with these two documents alleging that the supplier is authorized to manufacture and distribute this product. And of course, these documents are forged. We have seen these documents many times before where the manufacturers in China, they forge documents to deceive the person who's buying from them that these products are manufactured under license or authority. Now, I want to move on quickly to some of the methodologies that we discovered that were used to transport counterfeit and illicit goods between countries. Some of you would have seen these on social media, where a petrol tanker from Zimbabwe to South Africa was found to be transporting huge amount of cigarettes. And what had happened is that when these trucks arrive at the border post, they go under what we call a weigh bridge. Now, the weight of the goods that was meant to be in the truck and the weight of the actual truck when it was weighed didn't tally. And the officials realized something was offish. That's what led to them to actually try to have a look closely at this truck. And this is what they picked up. So this consignment was actually detained and obviously destroyed by customs at a later stage. Now, secondly, we also observed this particular truck.
Yeah, I think this is live. Facebook asipost. Saposta Facebook sesishisenini baphathi. Ayayayayayayayayayayaya. Akapheli. Yawona. Jesu.
Now, you can clearly see what is happening here. So usually there are several trucks crossing the border between South Africa and Zimbabwe to transport essential products um, um, uh, and other things. And usually you will find trucks crossing the border to Zimbabwe with the load, and they are meant to come back to South Africa without a load. Now, counterfeiters, what they usually do is that they know about these things. Then they approach the truck driver and offer him significant amount of money to bring a load across from Zimbabwe to South Africa. And this is what happened here. The driver had no idea what he was carrying. He was offered significant amount of money in cash, which he had in his possession, and he was carrying a significant amount of footwear and clothing worth over 27 million rand. And he didn't know. Look at these bales and the manner in which they are packed. It's impossible to see what is inside those bales.
Slide na oski HKD thumbs na moyo kandioneza chizuku life yaisaka good upenyu wakanaka punchline yetaingoverenga mubhuku oski tigorera tichaita mari namo tichaipinizisa yakakura iri ticha mulaife mangu ndichiitise yakandidzidzisa maketarudziteka.
Right. What you saw there is a video clip of individuals in Zimbabwe carrying boxes of illicit cigarettes on their back. And those cigarettes were loaded onto a truck waiting for it in South Africa. Now, some of you may be aware that the fence between South Africa and Zimbabwe is non-existent and has been widely reported. Now, you can cross at any given time. Now, these individuals, they get paid for carrying these goods across, and then somebody's waiting for them on this side of the border, and then they transport them into South Africa. Now, what had happened, those boxes loaded onto a bakkie meant for Johannesburg. Unfortunately, they had a tire burst. They did not have a spare wheel, waited on the side of the road, and the police actually saw this and then stopped and then realized actually these are goods being smuggled into the country. So these cigarettes were ultimately seized, the car impounded, and then the cigarettes were actually destroyed by customs. Now, moving on swiftly, I briefly want to talk about what we also observed, which was the importation of unregistered and prohibited medicines into South Africa. And of course, in response to what we were seeing happening at the border post, South Africa decided to create an integrated multidisciplinary law enforcement unit and they stationed it at various ports, particularly big airports like Tambo and King Shaka. And several individuals were arrested for importing ivermectin in large quantities. We had probably 11 separate incidents where people were bringing in this medication. Of course, this medication is unregistered in South Africa, and the people who were bringing in were not permitted to bring any form of medication into South Africa, so they were in contravention of the Medicines Act. And of course, the South African Health Product Regulatory Authority, SAPRA, they've got their own enforcement unit that stopped this medication, seized it, and destroyed it. And at the moment, they are pursuing other individuals who brought this particular medication quite recently. I'm not going to go into the discussion as to whether ivermectin works or whether it doesn't work for as a preventative or as a cure for COVID-19. That's a debate for another day. Moving on to the famous case, what had happened here, we got information about a warehouse just outside the Tambo airport, which was selling 3M masks on WeChat. We then arranged with the police to go to the premises to seize these particular products. While we were busy with the operation, one of the officers saw a fridge which was against the wall in the warehouse, and he looked closely, and then he saw bottles that had a liquid in it, and then with stickers around them stating COVID-19 vaccine. And remember, this was in November last year. At that point, there was not a single COVID-19 vaccine approved in this country. In fact, at that point, um, uh, it was only China and Russia that had announced that they have approved COVID-19 vaccine in their countries. The FDA in America only approved the Pfizer vaccine on the 11th of December, but this incident happened before that. And that is what is quite interesting about this. Now, of course, Interpol was worried about what is happening here. They got involved, they got information about it, and then we shared information with them. They passed it on to their member countries, now 194 of them. And the Chinese government was very interested about this particular case. They got hold of quite a lot of information from our local agents that led them to investigate in China. Eventually, about 80 people in China were arrested, and there appeared to have been links between the manufacturing facility for COVID-19 vaccines in China and the vaccine that was found in South Africa. I can't tell you what was in the vaccine that was found in South Africa, but the tests were run on the one that was found in China, and they actually confirmed it was just water and nothing else. Now, of course, because of the lockdown, people were prohibited from moving around. They were worried about getting infected. Everybody tried to do things online, including to get groceries. So e-commerce during lockdown increased exponentially. And of course, that created a conundrum because consumers will be more vulnerable to counterfeit goods because you just want the goods, you probably would care less about their origin. Now, there are a number of social media platforms where you find these adverts. There are encrypted online platforms as well that also assist with the circulation of these particular goods. But Instagram and Facebook marketplaces, these are prevalent because obviously that's where all these posts are posted there, and then these sales are being pushed. Now, of course, the people who are selling these counterfeit goods online, they enjoy doing it because they know there is some sort of unanimity, and it is incredibly difficult to investigate these people behind these Facebook posts. And sometimes it's one individual with split personalities or multiple accounts. If you take one down, and then he probably has got 4 or 5 others still running. Now, of course, there are other local social media platforms and online trading platforms, including B2Buy, OLX, Gumtree, where you find significant amount of counterfeit goods being sold through those platforms. So obviously, these platforms, they are amenable, and they have good processes and systems to take down these adverts, provided you are able to submit takedown requests that are valid. So we have been assisting our clients with quite a lot of takedown notices, and I know some of our clients, they have got quite a lot of good relations and collaborations with some of these trading platforms. And they have got direct contact with them to try and take down some of these posts almost immediately. And they also have got other collaborations to take down fake websites as well. So during this pandemic, we saw quite a lot of goods being sold online, and some of the investigation, they came to a knot, particularly in instances where you have got somebody selling on Facebook or Instagram and only want to chat to you on their messenger platform. You will not have their number, you would never know their identity, and what they require is that you pay upfront through a e-wallet form of payment, so some sort of cell phone payment, which is instant, and therefore payment is made quickly, and then they are able to arrange through courier for the item to be delivered to you. You will only realize when you receive the item that it is definitely counterfeit, because the quality is very bad. But you would not be able to actually determine the true identity of the person or individual who would have sold that particular item to you. And lastly, in some instances, you will be required to actually deposit money into a bank account opened in Cyprus, and then you will then speak to somebody on a consumer care line of a different country. Usually it's in India or UK. And if you're lucky, you do receive your order. You will see that the dispatch slip is from a different country, usually India or China. So how do you investigate a case like that? How do you prosecute somebody like that? Where do you begin to prosecute somebody who is committing a crime using that particular methodology? Now, very quickly, and obviously there are many other avenues to deal with counterfeit goods, but I just want to focus on some of the effective measures that we've put in place, particularly for online trading. Submitting, obviously, the takedown request or notices, and on top of that, if you're able to, depending on whatever information is available, you conduct a hybrid online and offline investigation to infiltrate the organized crimes that employ these sophisticated strategies to sell the counterfeit goods. Most importantly, strengthening collaboration and coordinated response with relevant stakeholders, be it regionally or internationally. And most importantly, online trading and social media platforms, by and large, they're best placed to stop online counterfeit good sellers, um, as they have business and contractual relationship with these individuals that may be behind this post. So if you have got collaborations with them, you might be able to get information that will enable you to investigate and to put strategies in place in a short or long term fight against the counterfeit goods trade. Of course, sharing information remain a large component in the fight against counterfeit goods, be it with the stakeholders, with competitors, as long as the information is shared and is flowing between stakeholders, it's easier to fight this pandemic. And lastly, I want to close with this. WeChat is a Chinese app. It is causing significant amount of headache globally. This is where goods are being advertised. Um, Payment happens in there, communication happens in there. There is no sort of paper trail in any of these transactions, which makes it almost impossible to investigate the identity of the seller and the buyer. It's completely hidden, and for one to be part of that particular platform, you are expected to understand Chinese. I understand because that's the only language that is being used in that particular platform. And I'm not aware of any other enforcement unit that has been able to crack that. And we know in South Africa as well, there are plenty of transactions of counterfeit goods that is happening on that platform, but it is incredibly difficult to crack and to try and prosecute those particular offenders. Um, in short, that is my presentation. I hope it was insightful and informative. And thank you for the opportunity.